As you may suspect, Episode 2 left us in a bit of a lurch. We have the blueprint, we have the logic, we have the surveillance, the algorithm, the genome being mapped. We can see what has been built. We can name what is operating against us right now. But there is a question Episode 2 did not answer. And it is the question that has been sitting underneath everything from the very beginning, whether you knew it or not. At least how, and maybe why, did it get to this point in the first place? Because the blueprint did not draw itself. The logic did not invent itself. The pattern that runs through every century of this story did not just appear out of nowhere one morning. Something started it. Somewhere, at some point, by someone, or something. So which is it? Are human beings simply born this way, twisted at the root, rotten at the core, capable of all this on our own? Or did we have help getting here? Did someone, or something, teach us how to do this? That is not a small question, and the answer changes everything about how you understand what you are living through. The answer to that question, both the how and the why, was written down a very long time ago by a man named Enoch. You met him in Episode 2. You read his calendar. You learned that the week you are living in was named before the week existed. What you did not learn in Episode 2 is that Enoch wrote about more than just the calendar of human history. He wrote about how that history was set in motion. He wrote about what set the pattern in place. He wrote about a class of beings, created by God, assigned by God, who chose to do something they were never meant to do. Most people have never heard of them, and there is a reason for that. Because the book that names them was never included in any Western Bible. Remember the Council of Laodicea, the same religious authorities Episode 1 already named, the ones who have always decided what you would be allowed to read, what you would be allowed to know, and what you would be allowed to ask. But the Church of Ethiopia kept it. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed it. The New Testament quoted it. And here we are now, reading it for ourselves. They are called the Watchers. Imagine a moment before the flood, before the nations had names, before any of the history you were taught in school, before any history at all. In that quiet, before everything moment, there were beings, made by God, assigned by God, given a purpose by God. They were called Watchers because that was their job, to watch over creation, to guard it, not to rule it, not to exploit it, not to interfere with it, to protect it. And here is a question that may already be forming in your mind, one that deserves an honest answer before we go any further. If God knew what they would do, why did he make them at all? Because God does not make tools. He makes beings. God created beings with the capacity to choose, because love that cannot choose is not love. A guardian who cannot abandon the post is not a guardian. They are a machine. The fall of the Watchers was not a flaw in the design. It was the cost of beings being free. And he knew the cost when he paid it. But here is what made the Watchers' story end differently from the story you are inside of. They had perfect knowledge. They had seen God face to face. They had no broken inheritance, no trauma, no system pressing against them, no reason to fail except the one they chose for themselves. And when they chose corruption, the judgment was final. The book of Jude says it plainly. The angels who did not keep their first estate but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. Not redeemed, not offered a path back. Final. And you got something else. You inherited a world the Watchers had already broken. You were born into a pattern they had already set in motion. You did not have the advantages they squandered. And when human beings, across every generation since, have participated in what the Watchers started, God has done something he never did for the Watchers. He has offered a way back. The choice carries the same moral weight. The mercy does not. The Watchers got judgment. You got an offer. That is the gap the rest of this episode is going to ask you to feel. Hold on to that. because everything else this episode is about to tell you sits inside that truth. Now back to the Watchers. They looked down at what they were meant to protect, and they decided they wanted it for themselves. But here is what made what they did different from any evil that came before or after. They did not pick up weapons and harm people directly. They did not march in and take what they wanted by force. That would have been ordinary evil, bad enough, but limited. One person can only hurt so many people with their own two hands. The Watchers did something far worse than that. They taught. They had knowledge no human being possessed. They had access to powers humanity had not yet discovered, and instead of guarding that knowledge, which was their job, they handed it over. They transferred it. They taught humans how to do things humans were not ready to do. Knowledge without wisdom, power without restraint, tools without conscience. And once knowledge is transferred, you cannot take it back. And here is something to sit with as you walk through the rest of this episode. Look around the ancient world, really look at it. The pyramids at Giza, stones weighing dozens of tons each, cut and fitted with a precision modern engineers cannot fully replicate. Pumapunku in Bolivia, interlocking stone blocks carved with surfaces so flat they look machine-finished. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a complex of carved monuments older than agriculture itself. Stonehenge, the Nazca lines, the astronomical alignments at Karnak. And Great Zimbabwe, a stone city in southern Africa, walls 30 feet tall, granite blocks fitted without mortar, holding for 1,000 years. A structure so undeniably sophisticated that European colonizers spent a century inventing fake origin stories rather than admit Africans built it. They suppressed the archaeological evidence into the 1970s. They destroyed the careers of researchers who told the truth, because the truth contradicted every lie the colonial project had ever told. By every reasonable measure of what we think early human beings should have been capable of, these structures should not exist. And yet they do. The text of Enoch names what the Watchers taught: metallurgy, astronomy, the reading of the stars, the signs of the earth, the signs of the sun, the courses of the moon, the cutting of roots, knowledge of materials, knowledge of construction. Now read that list again and look at what survived. Did the Watchers have a hand in what humanity built in those earliest centuries? The text says yes. The stones speak for themselves. The text does not speak in riddles. It does not use symbols you have to decode. It names exactly what was taught, like a teacher with a curriculum and a lesson plan, except the subject being taught was destruction. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. And there arose much godlessness, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. 1 Enoch, chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Read that again, slowly. Azazel did not attack anyone. He did not raise a hand against a single human being. He taught. He transferred. He gave the knowledge of weapons to people who had never held one before. And the result was not one act of violence. The result was the industrialization of violence. Harm scaled beyond anything one Watcher could have done alone. Something that outlasted the teacher. Something that ran on its own. Something that is still running. Sound familiar? Here is what that pattern looks like in plain English. A man with a knife can harm one person at a time. He can only swing his arm so fast. He can only reach so far. His evil has limits because his body has limits. Now teach that man metallurgy. Teach him how to forge 10 swords, then 100, then 1,000. Teach him how to arm an army. Teach him how to mass produce weapons. Teach him how to distribute them across nations. The man did not become more evil. His evil did not grow. What grew was the reach of it, the scale of it, the number of people he could harm without ever lifting his own hand. And here is what the Watchers understood that we did not understand until much later. Once knowledge is transferred, the harm runs on its own. The weapon outlives the teacher. The pattern outlives the lesson. and no single hand can be held responsible for what the knowledge set in motion. That is the watcher pattern. That is the root of the world's suffering, as Enoch named it. Not just evil. Evil with better tools. Evil that scales. Evil that learns to run its own course. And to read that in this moment, in this year, in this generation, with everything we just documented in episode 2 still echoing in our ears, is to feel how precisely the pattern still operates. Azazel taught men to make weapons. Today's watchers teach governments to make algorithms. The delivery mechanism changed. The pattern did not. The artificial intelligence systems being deployed across hiring, housing, credit, healthcare, policing, and surveillance are not neutral tools that just happen to produce harm. They were trained on centuries of decisions made by people who looked exactly like the people episode 1 named. A biased loan officer can harm a few dozen people in a career. A biased algorithm processes millions of applications per hour with legal cover because the algorithm decided. The accountability that once required many human hands can now be achieved with no hands at all. The sword required a face-to-face confrontation. You had to come face-to-face with another human being. Your weapon against theirs, your will against theirs. You looked them in the eye. You felt the moment. You lived it, or you didn't. There was no distance between you and what you were doing. The algorithm removed that entirely. Azazel is not in the room any longer, but his lessons continue to spawn evil. Blockchain was sold to you as liberation. The pitch was beautiful and simple, a financial system with no central authority, no bank that could redline you, no institution that could deny your loan because of your zip code, no gatekeeper standing between you and your own money, a ledger that belonged to everyone and could be controlled by no one. That promise was real, the delivery was not. Here is what blockchain actually is in plain English. It is a digital ledger, a permanent, public, unchangeable record of every transaction ever made on it, every coin sent, every wallet involved, every amount, recorded forever, visible to anyone who knows how to read it. Now think about what that means when the wrong people have access to it. Your wallet is connected to your identity. Every transaction is permanently recorded. Every donation you made, every organization you supported, every cause you funded, every person you sent money to, all of it on the ledger, all of it forever, all of it readable by any government, any corporation, any algorithm with the right tools. And the tools exist already. Companies have been built and paid handsomely by governments and law enforcement to trace cryptocurrency transactions, to identify wallets, to map who sent money to whom, to flag the people whose financial choices the state has decided are problematic. You gave money to a civil rights organization. The algorithm flagged it. You sent funds to a protest legal defense fund. The algorithm noted it. You donated to a journalist who criticized the powerful. The ledger recorded it, permanently, unchangeably, and now that record sits inside the same surveillance infrastructure already documented. And here is where it gets worse. The same algorithmic system that can read your blockchain history can also cut you off from it. The exchanges where most people convert crypto into spendable money are regulated. They are required to comply with government orders. A government that decides your wallet is associated with undesirable activity can instruct those exchanges to freeze your assets, to deny your withdrawals, to lock you out of your own money without a court order, without a trial, without ever telling you why. In days gone by, the bank that redlined you at least had to look you in the eye when it denied your loan. The algorithm that freezes your crypto wallet never has to see your face at all. Blockchain did not free the communities that traditional finance had excluded. It gave the old system a new ledger, one that is more permanent, more visible to those with power, and more easily weaponized against those without it. The promise was liberation. The delivery was the same lesson Azazel taught, a more efficient way to do what was always being done. Your current computer thinks in ones and zeros. On or off, yes or no. It reads information one piece at a time, like a person flipping through a 500-page book one word at a time until they find what they are looking for. A quantum computer does not flip through the pages. It tells you the word is on page 242, chapter 10, line 2, third word. Not because it reads faster, it's because it processes every single page all at once. It is not a faster version of your laptop. It is a fundamentally different kind of machine, the difference between a candle and a nuclear reactor. And here is what that means for you. Every encryption system protecting your private life right now, your text messages, your bank records, your medical history, your location data, was built on the assumption that no computer could break it in a reasonable amount of time. Quantum computing makes that assumption obsolete. A powerful enough quantum computer could crack the encryption protecting nearly every private digital communication on Earth. Not eventually, quickly. And quantum computing is not being built in a garage by idealists who want to make the world better. It is being built inside the same concentrated structures of wealth and power that built every previous instrument of control. Tech giants, defense contractors, the United States military, China, the same governments and corporations racing to be the first to read everything. Whoever gets there first does not just have an advantage. They have access to every secret that has ever been encrypted, every private conversation, every financial transaction, every medical record, every organizational plan, every whisper that was ever digitized and stored on a server somewhere. The communities that have spent 400 years being watched, tracked, redlined, and targeted have no quantum computer, no server farm, no government contract, no billion-dollar research budget. The same people who built the surveillance infrastructure are building this. Azazel taught men to make weapons, and every generation since has found a way to scale that lesson further. This is the most powerful weapon ever conceived, one that turns every wall of privacy a person or community has ever built into glass. This is the moment in most American documentaries where the camera would turn to China. The narrator would say, "Look at what they built over there. Look at the surveillance state. Look at the social credit system. Look at what happens when a government has total control over its citizens." This documentary is not going to do that. Not because what China built is not real. It is. It is documented. It is operating right now on hundreds of millions of people. But pointing at China as if America is the opposite, as if what is being built here is somehow different at its core rather than just at a slower pace, is itself a lie, a familiar one, the same kind that has been told to the covenant people for centuries. China is not a warning about what could happen here. China is a real-time mirror of what the United States is already becoming, at a different speed, with different language, behind different legal structures, but toward the same destination. What has been built in China is not a distant dystopia. It is a working demonstration, every communication monitored, every movement tracked, every transaction recorded, every person scored, any resistance identified and crushed before it can organize. This is not paranoia. This is the stated architecture of the systems being constructed, not just in China, but globally, by the same corporations, with the same investors, pointing toward the same concentrated centers of control. The difference between China and America right now is not the destination. It is the distance left to travel. And the distance is shrinking fast. And every weapon we have just described, the algorithm, the ledger, the quantum machine, has one thing in common. They all operate around the body, outside of it. They surround you. They contain you. They restrict what you can do, where you can go, what you can buy, what you can say. But they have not yet reached inside of you. Something different is coming. Something that does not build a wall around the body. Something that lurks inside it. Azazel taught men to make swords. Every generation since has found a more precise instrument, and we have already seen the most precise one in episode 2, the tool that reaches inside the body itself. This is the watcher pattern arriving at the place it has always been heading, outward, then inward, around the body, then into it, from the sword in the hand to the sequence in the blood. The teacher is gone. The lesson is the algorithm. This is not ancient history. This is not myth. This is not a story about something that happened before the flood and stayed there. The Watcher pattern is the pattern of the world we are living in right now. The pattern of how harm has scaled across every century of the covenant people's experience. The pattern of how knowledge keeps arriving in the hands of people who were never meant to hold it. And here is the part that should stop you. The Watchers were not the only beings God created with the capacity to choose. He created you with the same capacity, the same gift, the same dangerous, terrible, beautiful freedom. The Watchers chose corruption. They chose to teach what should have been guarded. They chose to scale evil instead of containing it. And here is the gap that no human strategy has ever crossed. The gap between what these systems can do, the algorithm, the ledger, the quantum machine, the genome, and what any community can build to prevent their use for evil. That gap is not crossed by marching. It is not crossed by voting. It is not crossed by any one person, no matter how gifted or determined or brilliant. This is exactly the gap that stood between Israel and Egypt. A people with no army, no weapons, no political power, no legal standing. On one side, the most sophisticated military and surveillance apparatus the ancient world had ever produced on the other. And it is exactly the gap that the God of Enoch, the God of Abraham, of Moses, of Daniel, of the Revelation of John, has always specialized in crossing, not by improving the odds, by making the odds irrelevant. Remember King Nebuchadnezzar. He heated the furnace 7 times hotter than it had ever been heated before. So hot that the soldiers who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego through the door, trained, mighty men of Nebuchadnezzar's own army, were killed by the heat before they could step back. They didn't dare go inside. They only needed to get close enough to push the 3 men in. The fire took those soldiers where they stood, scorched to death. Inside that furnace, where only one outcome should have been possible, 3 men were seen walking around, not in pain, not in agony, just walking, as if the fire had been ordered to forget its own nature. And then, like a mirage forming from the heat, a 4th man was in there with them. The God of Enoch, the God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God of Daniel, the one who has always specialized in crossing gaps no human imagination could breach. He was already inside the furnace, and he is already inside every genome they have touched.